I'm going to get right to our speaker today. He is a true local treasure. Jay Spencer is best known as the King of the Kilgan, the historic
I don't know if it's best known as, but that's one of my monikers stuck on me.
Oh, that's what I've always heard, so I'm shallow. But he plays the historic organ at the Palace Theater. He's been the organist there, the house organist, for 3 decades. At least.
Somewhere in there.
And he provides live accompaniment for the silent films, and he's also a dedicated volunteer there at the theater, and he's also performed there as a vocalist, and he's hosted special events there. He's actually a retired forensic scientist, how about that, for the Canton Police Department, and he serves on the board of directors for the Canton Symphony Orchestra. I see we have lots of people from the orchestra and from all the different realms. St. Timothy's Church, you've all come to support our wonderful friend. He sings with the Chorus for a Cause. He's the immediate past senior warden at St. Timothy's Church. That sounds like he's still doing police work, but a senior warden means that he's like the lay person in charge of the church, so a little confusing. He sings bass in the choir and frequently, fortunately for us, plays the organ at St. Timothy's. He's a traveler. In fact, he booked this program today when I accidentally called him in France. So that was a little embarrassing. I'm going to say that he's a good friend, but I'm not that good. I didn't pay attention. On a personal note, he showed up at University Hospital when we were really in trouble. And he came to support us, and again, just recently at Altman Hospital. So he's a really good guy, the nicest of the nice. I think you're going to love him just as much as we do. Jay Spencer.
Thank you. I'll let you just put that back. Well, thank you very much. Gosh, that's a lot to live up to. Well, I want to welcome you to the 20s. Isn't it funny that we're living in the 20s now? But things in the let's see. Oh, there we go. There we go. Things were a little bit different 100 years ago in the 20s. You know, when you think about, we all had people in our families, you know, during that period, and I'm not going to say any of you were around at that period, but I don't think so. But anyway, in the roaring 20s, think about this for a second. Half of the homes in the United States didn't have electricity. Half of the homes in the United States didn't have indoor plumbing. That was only 100 years ago. The first radio broadcast, 1920 in Pittsburgh, KDKA. And a lot of the people didn't have radios. Of course, there was no TV. I don't think there were cell phones. Time travelers, you never know. I'm not sure about that, but they were starving for entertainment at that point in time. So as the 20s started, this is what it looked like, the roaring 20s. But you know what else was going on at this time? Yeah, we want beer. So what was happening a lot in this period were tiny theaters were starting to crop up. People opening little storefront theaters in towns and places. The movies were shorts and maybe something as simple as watching horses run by or Nickelodeon-style films. There was a small theater, we'll get to it later, but there was a small theater right over there called The Lyric in the 20s that was only there for a few years. And as far as I could tell, it was only there for a few years until it disappeared. But theaters like that were cropping up that gave people, common people, guys coming from the mill, coming from the factory, coming from there, a place to go in the evening. These weren't big outlandish things. These were just common pedestrian type entertainment, Nickelodeon style things. So let's go back a little bit. The first cinematographer, Louis Le Prince in France in 1880. He figured out a way to put images onto film. Now you're thinking, oh, didn't Edison do that? Well, no. This guy did it first. He had the earliest surviving piece of film footage is from Le Prince in 1880. It's called the Roundhay Garden Scene. Now let's see if I can make this work. It's only about 2 seconds. But think about this. This was 1880. This lady doing her little jig right there died 11 days later. I know, isn't that funny? It also puts into perspective what we're doing with these. No. So the Roundhay Garden Scene was, Le Prince that was one of his earlier things. He also did a short film on, with his son playing the accordion, and there's some other things that, that still survive. But that was the earliest. What's interesting is, and I went this a little ahead of time, but this fella here, the notorious Thomas Edison. But in 1890, Le Prince vanished. Yeah, vanished. I mean, he was on his way somewhere, never arrived, never found, had never found his body, never found his suitcase, nothing. Completely disappeared. So Edison, of course, wanted to be known as the father of cinematography, so he sued and to get the patents for film. And Louis Le Prince's son, Adolphe, came to testify against Edison. So at the turn of the century, they had this thing. Le Prince lost. Edison won his court battle and was then kept the patents for all the film and such. Another aside, Adolphe committed suicide not long after the court case. Mystery? I don't know. Anyway. So Edison won, and Edison compiled groups of filmmakers into what was known as the Edison Trust. So he got these guys all together, including even the film stock maker Kodak, and was able to essentially control that fledgling film industry at that point in time. So if the guy over here, like the Lyric Theater, opened his little theater, he had to pay Edison to use any kind of film stock, any kind of thing at all. Anybody who made a movie had to pay Edison into the Edison Trust. It essentially was a true monopoly on film at that point in time, and Edison was the controlling factor. Now, along came this group of upstarts. When they would try to make films, they were in the East in New Jersey and such, they were trying to make films, they were getting beaten down by the Edison Trust. So if they tried to make a film outside of Edison, bad things happen. And there's a film online or on TV right now on one of the channels, one of the streaming services about this, and it shows these guys trying to make films and actually having thugs come in and beat them up when they're trying to make something outside of the Edison Trust. Now we're talking like 1910-ish. D.W. Griffith, one of the early pioneers of film, decided that he wanted to make his own outside of the Edison control. So what did he do? He goes west. So he originally goes to Arizona and then ends up in Hollywood. And he made, in 1910, he made a film called In Old California, which is arguably one of the first films made there. But being in California kept him outside of the control, just from the distance. You think in that period of time, that was a big separation. There wasn't a jet flying across all the time. So it was an easy way to keep him out of their control. Now all these guys, this is Jack Warner here, Warner Brothers, Marcus Loeb, Marcus Loeb of Loew's Theaters, Carl Laemmle, Adolph Zukor. They all had their ideas of being able to make film and make it independent of everything else. Eventually then, in about 15, the trust fell apart. It was deemed a monopoly and was broken apart, and Edison went on to do all of his other Edison things. But the trust fell apart so that movie people could begin to make their own things and have some independence. These guys realized, though, that this industry needed more than just the Nickelodeon-style films. They realized that to move on, the movies had to have story, had to have some kind of point to people going to see them. Adolf Zukor was one of the first to realize that movies could be features, not just short subjects, not just pictures of fire trucks going down the street. He realized that he could take stories and put them into film and onto film. Obviously, D.W. Griffith was the same way, because in 15 we have Birth of a Nation, which was one of the first big epic movies, starring Lillian Gish from Maslin, or of Maslin. And then Adolf Zukor had his famous Players Film Company, which his big movie was Tess of the Storm Country. Now, wait a minute, I'm getting ahead with this clicker. And starring Mary Pickford. Now, what was interesting about this period was that the movies were just movies up until this point. Meaning, you went to see the movie, you didn't care who was in it. The whole idea that a person starring in the movie, you didn't know who they were. You may have known the person, but they weren't movie stars. At this point in time, Mary Pickford becomes a movie star. So not only is she really good in the movies, but she's brilliant in the sense that she knows that this is a business. And she eventually goes in with Douglas Fairbanks and Chaplin and other people to start United Artists, which is still around. But she knew that being just on the movies and being a pretty face on this film was not going to cut it, and she knew how to do that. Now, this guy, I think everybody knows who this guy is, because in 16 he was considered the most famous person on the planet. Now, in prior to 15, he had been in movies like with the Keystone, the Keystone Cop style movies, little shorts. In 15 or 16, he signed with SNA Pictures in Chicago. He got a signing bonus of $10,000. Now think in 1916 monies. And he was working for $1,250 a week, $1,250 a week. I mean, that's not a bad pay now, let alone in 1916. And it also gave him the opportunity to be able to have control of his films. So he was able to do things on his own and create as a true artist then. Let's see here. Now, during the same period, there were hundreds of short films being made, because what did these theaters need? They needed content. Oh, now there's an interesting term. They needed content for their web of theaters around the country. So they were making short subjects, 2-reelers, and they were cranking those babies out maybe one a week. Now this, in my opinion, Julie and I might be able to argue this point, but I think this is possibly the best 2-reeler ever made. And this guy, Mr. Buster Keaton. Up until this point, he was also a player in those style, I'm going to call them Keystone Cops because you know what that is. But he was in those kind of Keystone Cops, Fatty Arbuckle, those kind of movies where he was a bit player, but still genius on screen. In 20, he was able to write, star, and direct his own short subject. He was 25. 1 week, how many of you have seen 1 week? Raise your hand, don't be there we go. Now, I wish I could just have played 1 week for you here for the 20 minutes. It is one of the funniest movies you'll ever see, and it's fascinating because we didn't have CGI at that point in time. So the things that they did on film, they actually did. So they were, when little synopsis of the story, Buster and his new bride, just getting married. Well, his uncle gives him as a wedding present a home in this box. So it's the portable house company, and the guy pulls up in a truck and pushes it off the back of the truck, and it flops there, and the guy says, "There's your house." And so Buster has to build the house. Well, this is what happens. And the one of the climactic scenes is when a storm comes, the house, oh darn it, the house starts to spin. And so the house is built on a turntable, and in this storm, the house begins to spin and chaos ensues. But if I do this at the theater all the time, so watch for that, because it really is terrific. There was a lot of foreign influence at this point in time. German expressionist movies were big. The German films, this is Murnau here. He directed Sunrise and Nosferatu. This is Fritz Lang over here. He directed Metropolis. But the movies, these came from Germany. Their production values were incredible at this point in time. And the movies themselves were just beautiful to watch. Of course, we know the story of Nosferatu. And one of the reasons that we have Nosferatu is because of it being imported in the United States. When Nosferatu came out, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which it was based on, sued to have the movie destroyed because he used it was unauthorized use of her husband, who had died, her husband's story about Dracula. So the judge ordered all copies of Nosferatu destroyed in Germany. Well, they had already sent some films outside and to the United States. So those survived the destruction, and that's how we ended up having Nosferatu, which I've done that at the theater a few times too. Metropolis is this giant epic sci-fi film, which is incredible. Cabinet of Caligari is just bizarre. I mean, there's not many ways to describe it other than bizarre. It's a great movie, but it's just bizarre. All the buildings and sets are sloped and curved, and the makeup is real extravagant and everything. We'll talk about Sunrise in just a few minutes here. I wanted to show a couple, the big stars of the day, that as these movies progressed, these people became our movie stars. So Rudolph Valentino, originally The Sheik, Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Son of the Sheik, let's see, On the Rocks with Gloria Swanson. But he was a mega star in the 20s. Died very young, died at age like 31 of I think appendicitis or some kind of thing. But he was a mega star at the time. Oh, I should have warned you before I put that slide up. I hope nobody feels faint from the view of the Phantom. 1925, now here we saw him earlier, Carl Laemmle. I've done this movie all over the place, and people love this film, and for good reason. It's really a fun movie to watch. At the time when it came out, of course, it had a warning with it that if you feel faint when the Phantom's mask comes off, to see the house manager and close your eyes, it'll be over shortly. When this debuted in New York, though, they actually put a pipe organ in the theater built a pipe organ into the theater for the movie. Here we go, Keaton again. Now, after 1 week, then he went on to develop features, wrote, directed, starred in. This is one of his. There are no bad Keaton films. There really aren't. I mean, any Keaton film you pick up, even if it was when he went to MGM and kind of lost control of the films, they're still good. But this one is always considered in the top 10 of best films of all time by the Library of Congress and everything. It was a Confederate war movie, and he actually got trains and crashed them on bridges, and I can't describe it, but this stunt with the railroad tie on the front of the engine is just epic and undescribable. It's like he's riding on the front of a locomotive and throws a railroad tie at another railroad tie to knock it off the track so the locomotive can go by. it's, obviously the railroad tie wasn't a real railroad tie, but it was still substantial enough that he could do this stunt and still on the front of a moving locomotive. I know. Chaplin, again, this was, the Gold Rush is one of my favorites of his. This is as much as I hate the word iconic, the iconic scenes, there's a couple in this where he eats his shoe where they're starving, and he eats his shoe like he's carving a turkey. And they said he was sick for weeks because this was made out of licorice. He ate so much licorice that he was just all the time. And then, I don't know if you can see this down at the bottom, this is the famous roll scene where the rolls are dancing. Chaplin made this tramp character, though, and used it, clear through his career, and up until the talkies. But he, famously said that talkies were a fad, that silent movies were the way it was going to be, and talkies would come and go, and he would move on, doing this. Safety Last is a fun movie, and I really like it. I don't think it's the greatest movie of the silent era, but the reason I put it on up here is because Harold Lloyd was huge star. His glasses character was and very, very, very funny. But this scene of him hanging on the clock is one that most people recognize from the silent era. Him climbing the building outside. I mean, look how high up we are. Well, here's how we did this. It's all perspective. Now, the thing is I say that, oh, well, this is how they did it. Look at where he's at. He's up there, and this giant safety mattress looks like something they just took off the bed in the back room. And so he's standing here, and there's something here, but still, with perspective, it's still an incredible, incredible stunt. There was a guy in this movie, and he was called the Human Fly or something because, the stunts of the 20s, he would climb up the side of buildings. Well, he starred in this also with Harold Lloyd. And Miss Clara Bow, who is as cute as a button, first off, but she was the it girl. And also, okay, trivia nerds, what's Wings known for? Julia? The first Oscar. Mandy does too. Yeah, this was Wings was a great film about World War I, starring Clara Bow and Buddy Rogers, and also Gary Cooper, who happens, I don't know if he's named in the credits or not, but Gary Cooper also makes a appearance in Wings. But he's terrific. It's a terrific film, but it was also the first Oscar winner for Best Picture. Clara Bow, though, made her way a little bit into the talkies and then retired, but she's terrific. Now here's the movie I was talking about. This was German, Murnau. It's Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, and Julie and I were just talking about it. This is one of the prettiest films ever. I'm surprised it doesn't get more recognition, and it's because it's just a beautiful film. And even from the still, you can see how it's done. But Janet Gaynor, George O'Brien, they're a farm couple, and he falls for a city girl. I know. And so anyway, but it's hopefully when the theater reopens, this will be in the spring. I'm hoping to do that. Now, like I said, up until this point, the movies had been relatively pedestrian, kind of basic, meant for common folks coming from work, needing entertainment. In New York City, though, in about 1914, I believe it was, this guy here and the Strand, this was the Strand Theater in Times Square, but they built this theater and decided that the only way you could get movies to step up was to make the theater something to go to. So the first movie palace was born. And they hired this guy here, Sam Rothafel, who was known as Roxy, which Roxy Theater is all over the place. Well, Roxy knew that the only way to get the upper class into the movies was to make it an upper class movie theater. And so he built something with lavish curtains and an orchestra and an organ and about 3,000 seats, ushers, this and that. And that was the birth of the movie Palace. Now, this is a compilation of things. I think this might be one of the Fox theaters. Here's a Warner, this is a little later in 30s. But you can see some of here's the elaborate marquee for a Fairbanks movie, Art Deco. I know. Now take it out of black and white, and here's what I think this might be the Paramount in California. I think so. But anyway, just look at the colors. This was the San Francisco Fox. Fox theaters were chained. There's still Atlanta, Detroit, St. Louis. Fox still exists and still sort of look like this. This was San Francisco. And it's been said, and I've heard recordings, it's been said though, that this was the best Wurlitzer organ ever created. The way it was voiced and in the room and everything. 5,000 seats and a very humble, appearance. It's just like a little bit of gold leaf goes a long way there. But it was unfortunately torn down in 1968. The organ survived, though. The organ console and the organ did survive, and it's still playing. And the reason this is up here, and I can't remember which theater this is, but these theaters were built with in themes: Mayan, Chinese, the Oriental, notice, if you can see down this corner, there's like a Hindu statue in the corner, and you can see the way the things are built with. They were like Grauman's Chinese Theater, those kind of things. Anybody know where this is? You should. This is your state theater. This is the Ohio in Columbus. Now, this one, we almost lost it in the 70s also. That during that period of urban renewal was destructive force on these great theaters. But the Ohio was scheduled for demolition, and a lady stepped in and said, hey, this has to be saved. And it even got to the point where a guy, and I can remember his name, a guy bought the organ. This is a Robert Morton theater organ, but a guy actually bought the organ and still owns it, but it's still inside the theater. So it's technically not the theater's organ, and he saved it. This place is magnificent. It's like 3,500 seats, I think, maybe. And but it's home to the Columbus Symphony and all kinds of things. And I played there a few times in the summer during the movie series. But it is just when I was a kid, I lived in Logan, Southeast Ohio, and the Ohio was just being saved. And I remember, and if you can picture this in your head, there was a commercial for them, and Dennis James was the organist there. And it was when the TV commercial would come on, it was a black screen, and all you'd hear was this click, and then the lights on the console would come up, and you'd hear the organ play, and it would rise up out of the pit, and that's all you saw. And it was just that, and it said, Save the Ohio, whatever. But maybe that might have been the start of me doing this, because it was just incredible. But if you ever get a chance, though, Clark Wilson plays during the summer and regularly, and it is phenomenal. This is a little closer to home. This is our Canton Palace Theater. This is a postcard from early on to promote the theater. But I just wanted you to see what the artist rendering was at the time. Opening night. So we had in November 22nd, 1926. Here was the ad in the Rep. Now remember, these houses were built for films, but also for vaudeville. So when you went to the movies, you didn't just go buy your popcorn, sit down, and watch a film. You actually went to see maybe 3 or 4 acts. I think it's like it says on here. 4 others. So they had like 5 acts. It was a big night. So you went to see the movie, a short, the Palace Orchestra would play. Banks Kennedy would be at the organ. You would see a feature. You would see Ruiz and Bonita, which you'll see them in a second, and their dances supreme. Gelman and his whispering orchestra, whatever that is. I don't even know what whispering orchestra is. And 4 other big acts of vaudeville. Now, as we said, the movie palaces, which the palace was literally a movie palace, had a series of ushers and to greet you as you came in. And what's interesting is this guy right here. His name is Don Ingold. Did anybody happen to know Don Ingold? Well, he was the guy who trained me as a house manager in 1987. He was still volunteering there. He lived to be like 104, but greatest guy. But what's really funny is he was very small. He was this short little fan. So all these guys were like this tall. And it's just, when I think about it, it's like, these guys are all small. But they had 16 ushers they had for the palace when it opened, and Don was amongst them. This is the current lobby. You've all been into the palace, I'm hoping. I'm going to give you the evil eye if you have not. This is the current. This was 1926. This was the lobby in 1926. We still have this piece of furniture. This one is missing. Any of you happen to have any palace furniture in your house? You never know. You never know. There are some of these pieces still there. Some of the lamps and such. This is the mezzanine lobby in 26 when it opened. It looks so narrow, it's actually much wider than that. These pieces are still there in these chairs. We still have some of these things. This frieze along the wall is called the Triumphal Entry of Frederick the Great, just in case your trivia ever pops up for that. The theater, when it opened, was on what was known as a split week schedule. So it wasn't like now where a movie would play for weeks at a time, or, you know, they would, when Tin Hats opened on the 22nd, it was there for a few days, and then it would change. Same with the vaudeville acts. The palace was on the Keith circuit, Keith Albee, Keith, meaning we got the better acts of the vaudeville circuit. We would get the Burns and Allen. We would get the Danny Kaye was in a Kaye and Williams or something like that. He played at the Palace at one point in time. But we would get the better acts. And so when you came here, you were guaranteed to see Gelman and his whispering orchestra. This was the men's room entrance, which, as every men's room should look this elaborate. Unfortunately, this table is still there. These are missing. So as I said, if you'd happen to be eating on these at your dining room table, let me know. This is still there, and we have a few of the other things. But you think over 100 years, a lot of things come missing. They would break and such. This was the interior in 26. Now, if you've been there recently, you know, and you'll see it in a second in this slide. But when the theater opened, the whole idea was that it was meant to be you were in an outside courtyard. So you were supposed to be sitting on a mountainside between 2 Spanish castles in the sunset of the Mediterranean. And if you look up here, next time you're at the theater, if you look up to the sides, you'll see these keyhole slots through the false wall. There were orange trees coming through the walls. There were Mediterranean cedars above the proscenium and across. There were vines hanging, flowers. There were doves flying overhead. There's still a dove right up about there, and there's one back there. But the doves would be flying overhead. There was a parrot in a cage, not a real parrot, but he was probably a stuffed parrot, downstairs. And when you came into the theater, when you look up, the clouds would be going overhead, and still are. Stars would be overhead twinkling in the sky, still are. And when you came into the theater, you would see the sun would set So the lighting would have the sun set, and when the movie was over, the sun would rise. I know. And our lighting guys found the apparatus up around the top of how, oh shoot, that spoiled that effect. Found the apparatus up around here, it's up behind here, of how the sunrise sunset was made. They could not figure out how they did it, and still can't. There was a huge panel behind the stage back here that's gone now, but and I'm assuming it might have had some control of the lighting system to do that, but they still could not figure out how they got that to work. And this is our present day. So we have that. We are missing all the greenery, of course, and I tried to get some of the vines back and put some in, and we're eventually would love to get some of the greenery back, but probably think about what outside was like in that period of industrial, heavy Canton, Akron, Massillon, smoke, cigarette smoke, coal smoke, everything else. I'm sure that the greenery got really disgusting. And so when our guys were up here changing some lights around in these keyholes where the orange trees were, they said if you look behind the wall, you could see where they just cut them loose, and they had fallen in behind the wall. So they're still in there in the bottom, but so I can imagine. They were like orange balls of yarn and stuff on silk trees. Let's see here. Little things of, there's our Frederick the Great thing again. I'm running out of time. I hope you guys have nowhere to go. So anyway, but the furniture was in this shape, but we've got some of the furniture back, all the furniture actually back is back in usable condition now. So it's no longer in the basement covered in mildew. This is 1926 outside, and you can see the streetcar lines. This is our Kilgan organ, which I played now and again. And this was an ad for Kilgan, and this was the palace in that ad. So you can see it was not white at the time when the theater opened. $75,000. Now this was, and I always have to mention this guy when I do tours at the theater because the psychics of the world say he's still there. So this was Banks Kennedy. Well, Banks was brought in as a ringer to open the theater. He opened the theater in 1926. He was there for 2 years. He left in August of 28. And Banks was a pretty big deal. He was a Chicago organist, played on WOK in Chicago and the Capitol Theater in Chicago. So he was a pretty well-known guy. And at that point in time, theater organists were big deals because these guys played these huge theaters. Jesse Crawford and Lee Irwin, those guys in the New York Paramount circuit and the Roxy Theater and all over, they got paid big money to do these. And they were there all the time, because the theater doors would open at 1 and the last show was at 9 something, and that was, every day. And he was playing with the movies and along with the Palace Orchestra. So they earned their money. And he was pretty popular around town too. I've found where he's like signed yearbooks and stuff. He was a pretty popular guy. On the, let's see, house left, organ chamber, on the wall, that picture you saw, that little weird thing, was a piece of glass. And under that glass, in November 22nd, 1922, or 1926, Banks went up into the organ chamber before he started playing and wrote this organ. And what's funny is my IT guy corrected this. Banks spelled it with an E. My IT guy was fixing my slides, and when I noticed, I was like, oh, he corrected it. Banks actually spelled it O-R-G-E-N. And I don't know if he was being funny, like saying this organ or something or what, I don't know. Dedicated in America's most versatile organist. And his first song he played was the popular song of the day, Valencia. It's a Spanish song. And but written by Kennedy himself, what guts. So I think I would have liked Mr. Kennedy. So. Here's Ruiz and Bonita. So they were a Latin dance. Obviously, everything was geared around that whole Spanish theme. And but they had this is their bit. They had band on stage, and they would play while they changed their costumes. So this guy was vaudeville here. Bert Hanlon. This is Bert Hanlon over here. We had sharpshooters and Lost at Sea. I would put this in here just in case that Ellen and Bob Schroeder came, because Tiffany Productions, Ellen's grandfather, Grant Cook, was a producer at Tiffany Productions, which is kind of funny. He didn't produce this movie, but he was a producer there. He wanted to be in the movie business. Notice Banks Kennedy at the console of Canton's largest organ, Palace Orchestra. 1933, Famous Bill has tiny people and elephants. There were actually elephants on the stage of the theater in 1933. Now this is what I was telling you. This is, notice last day of opening program. This is only a couple days in, and then College Days starts. We actually have a copy of College Days. Tin Hats does not still exist in its entirety. It's missing a reel or two, but eventually it might turn up. But a lot of these films just degraded. You know, that nitrate film stock that they were made on, they just fell apart or just were destroyed. And so they, a lot of the films were lost as it went. But, and then of course we have Tarzan started after that. This is a little bit of trivia too. The TV show I Love Lucy, remember in the credits, it always says music by Duvall. Well, this is Frank Duvall. That's who did that. He was a big deal. Well, his father, Herman, was one of the Palace conductors of the Palace Orchestra. And their home sat right where the Palace stage is now. So they tore down the Duvall's house to build the orchestra, or build the theater. The theater was designed by John Eberson, this guy up here, and his claim, he built about 300 atmospheric theaters. He was the one who came up with the thought of building something that would be completely magical. You would walk into and you would be transported to another land or another entire situation like you're outside. And Eberson was the guy. He designed everything in this theater, lighting, color, everything. This is a fire curtain, by the way. And he had that furniture was imported from Spain that you saw earlier. It was all hand-carved mahogany. We had a guy come in and tell the board, an antique guy, come in and tell the board a few years ago that furniture really wasn't worth anything. And just in case they would want to get rid of it, I'm assuming probably would be. But anyway. Okay, so now we've been transported to Massillon. This is the Lincoln. The Lincoln is actually in 1915. It's one of the earlier movie theaters in the country. And I think, Mandy can correct me, they used to bill it as the oldest movie theater. I thought some.
It was the earliest purpose-built theater.
Yeah, and so, and there were several others built about the same time, but 1915, it's early. And that is in the 50s. Now, when it opened, the Lincoln had a Hill Green Lane organ, which was built in Alliance. Would not have been the same as like the Palace organ or even a church organ. It was built as a straight pipe organ, probably off into a corner, built all in one unit box. That was removed, and then this was not the organ, but this was what the organ would have looked like at the Lincoln originally when it was installed. And then I think what it says, it's removed in 1938 after it really wasn't used probably at all. But and then in 31 it was taken over by Warner Brothers. So Jack Warner there earlier, he was had a lease on that theater. A lot of these movie theaters, like the Palace included, were leased by the movie studios. So for a while, Disney held the lease on the theater. Warner had it for a while, and they would come in and lease it and then to give it a place to show their films. The Grand Theater was next door. Do anybody remember the Grand Theater? Oh, nobody does. It was, I think it was till 51. It became J.C. Penney. I think that's right. I have no record of whether it had an organ or something or not. I don't know that. I'm guessing it might have just had like piano maybe, or maybe like a quartet or something probably play for things. Yeah, I forgot to mention back. And here's the ad for the Lyric. It was at 26 South Erie, right over here. The phone number was 6544, just in case you want to call the Lyric. But the Lyric must have it was only listed in the directory from like 21 or 3 till probably Depression took it out, I would imagine. But here's an interesting picture of the Grand from the Lincoln. And look at the front of the Grand there with the Dreamland thing. More Nickelodeon stylish. Now, in the Lincoln though was it had a pretty predominant movie business. So Ben-Hur was one of the epic silents from like 1925, and when it opened, it toured in the big theaters around big Cleveland, Philadelphia, with orchestra and such. In 26, though, it made its way to the Lincoln, and notice it says with the New York Symphony Orchestra. Now, I don't know how many pieces were in the New York Symphony Orchestra, but I can't imagine there being too many in the Lincoln. But it played, and then but also The Unknown Soldier and Seawolf and a DeMille movie over here. So there was a lot going on at the Lincoln in one screen. Now this is downtown Canton at the same time, about the same time. A lot of you probably remember the Ohio in Canton. It was originally the Alhambra. And then of course the Lowe's across the street, catty corner across the street from the Palace. The Lowe's became the Plaza then later before it was destroyed, but the organ was a Robert Morton theater organ, and still the organ still exists. It's at the Polk Theater in Lakeland, Florida. So, and I was down there once and was able to play it. So at least, but it still does, still thriving. But so unfortunate that we lost the Lowe's when you think of what we could have had with the two theaters side by side. This is the Strand, which was down the street, right, kind of like in front of Bender's. So where the parking lot is in front of Bender's, the Strand sat there. This was in 1917, so like say Lincoln's 15, this was 17, so this is a really old theater. I love this. Notice the promo for Go and Get It, a comedy. This movie was starring Bull Montana, who was a wrestling guy, and he was in an ape costume, and he had a human brain transplanted into his ape head. I'm sure that was a real epic. Okay. This was about 1928. This was late in 28. And the thing that I want you to notice is this right here. Oh, we've entered a whole new era by 1928. And what's interesting is this one, audible feature picture with fascinating sound effects. So the Strand in Canton was the first in the area to use talkies. And it was a Vitaphone house, see that? And so they used a synchronized score with it. So you have like a record, and it would sync up to the film and play along with it. I'm not exactly sure how they did. I'm guessing it was the same thing. It was a synchronized, fascinating sound effect score for this one. But the Strand, and then not long after that, then the Palace was still silent at that point in time. And then this was the interesting thing too. So this is August of 28, and Banks leaves for Marion. So the Banks Kennedy was leaving and says, his farewell solo, Goodbye Canton, which I would love to find a copy of that. Banks went on, though, to open the Marion Palace, same thing, and then went on from there to Fort Wayne and ended up in New York at Wanamaker's department store, playing there. It was the ghost hunters, when they started coming to the palace, would started talking about how the organist was shot by a jealous husband at the theater. And I was like, well, that would be tough because he was playing in New York in 1942. So, and it was supposed to be Banks, but so anyway, so I had to correct that problem. But he actually, but he didn't live. He lived to be only like 45, and he is buried in Cleveland. Him and his wife lived in Cleveland. Let's see, what else do we want to pick out of this one? I just love these ads, though. I think they're so fun. The Lyceum. Oh, we're having some burlesque at the Lyceum, and yeah, the Moonlight Ballroom. Yeah, really fascinating. So then, 1936 was the last silent. Like I said, Charlie thought that silents were going to be the thing, so he kept going. And Modern Times is a great movie, but 36 was the last of the silents. And then by 39, this is what we're up to. We're up to Wizard of Oz. You know, with that, Gone with the Wind, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I mean, think about over a decade how movies changed from Buster Keaton's One Week to Gone with the Wind. And it's pretty fascinating. And then of course, we're getting into in the Depression. And the palace was open into the Depression. It closed for like a year, from 31 to the end of 32, and then had its grand reopening, but survived. Okay, you ready? There you go. Thank you.
Was that you playing?
Yeah.
That was Jay.
Could you see me at the bottom? I was in the. It was hard to see because it was at the
That
bottom.
was
of the screen.
Jay at the organ.
Yeah, at the palace.
Yes,
Yep.
at the palace. Oh, Tom.
Yeah, Eberson did the Civic. He did the three that still exist, the Civic, the Palace, and the Marion Palace. I don't know if he did others that have been destroyed or not. He did some in Cincinnati, but they weren't like these. They weren't like movie palaces. They were just more basic theaters. But he did like 300 all over. I think there's about 20, there's maybe 20 or 21 still exist. But and they look similar. Yeah, there's 21 exists that's still atmospheric. Yeah.